Hi there.
Hi, Lucian. So we got the spreadsheet pulled up here, so we have some data to work with. Josh, are we showing this on the stream right now too? Sweet. I see that somebody, I'm assuming Shelby, is going in and fixing numbers that are no longer the case.
Yes, I am doing that, and it's changing our bottom lines rather substantially.
I see that. So, while that's happening, I'm gonna reiterate here. There seems to have been a little bit of confusion, and maybe this is just because I simply posted this as a COC meeting. But the entire purpose of tonight is to hammer out the season passes, whether or not they're going to be a thing, and if so, what the cost is going to be. This is kind of a carryover from the COC meeting on Thursday, Tuesday, whenever it was, that we weren't able to do because we didn't have the data in front of us. So that is what we are doing tonight. So, the last column after all the parks that doesn't have a abbreviation at the top, I'm assuming that's the total for the total cost for that week.
Yes. So column G is the total for cost by week.
Okay, cool. So right now we're looking at paying a total cost of just shy of 12 grand for site fees over the course of the winter.
That's what the numbers say.
So I guess
I
I'm
think it's important that
so.
sorry, I just think it's important that we understand that that is with a budget amendment being approved by the general membership for an increase in site fees for Frozen Coast and Ravenstone from 2 hours to 3 hours.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. I forgot to point that out. So I'm trying to think here how we're going to plan this, like what the idea is to average it, I suppose. Are we're taking the total cost and going by total players, or it's throwing me off trying to figure this out for across the state, I guess.
Sorry, and this spreadsheet maybe isn't like the best one to work from. This was sort of where my mind went to. We need to understand the total impact of what our site fees, expenses, and income are, and then we also need to understand that by each park. So I kind of broke it down, and maybe this just makes sense in my mind for the way that my brain maths. Um, but I kind of thought that what we could do from here is like run some scenarios, right? Like here's the numbers of what this looked like last year. Um, and then, some of the questions were what is the impact of a player in the Frozen Coast Ice Fire Bay area that if they buy a Northreach wide season pass and they travel and they attend park on Saturday and Sunday, what's the financial impact to Northreach? And is that sort of offset by the benefit of having an incredibly involved member?
So and then yeah, assuming
So and then
yeah, and then assuming we have that that number, like we've figured out how much damage or lack thereof they can cause, we can look at adjusting the price to mitigate that or determine at what point, like having enough buffer built in so that we're okay if that happens with 5 people or 10 people or 20, and like where like it will help us draw that kind of that that scale, I guess.
I think maybe the first question we should ask is, has Frozen Coast been unique in the idea that we pay $5 per player? Because if it's always a set fee everywhere, I don't think it matters how many people attend each park. But in, last, well, not last reign, but the one before, I guess last reign and the one before, as I was prime minister, we paid five. Sorry, I just got a phone call. Um, last, as prime minister, we were paying $5 per player, and so if we had a situation where 10 people came down and they were all on a season pass, or came up from Icefire Bay on a season pass, that could negatively impact our ability to pay the site fee. Now, that being said, I honestly don't see this as a major problem, but I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention when I was raised some concern about the season passes. So the first question I would ask is, are there any other parks that pay per person, or is it all a set fee?
Everybody else pays a set fee. Frozen Coast is super lucky. Well, on one hand, they're super lucky, right? In that they don't have to pay over who attends. But in instances for like Ravenstone, they typically make money on their site fees because they pay $27.50 an hour, and so as long as they have, if they have 10 people show up, that pays for everything. If they're playing for 2 hours, and so if they have 30 people show up, 20 people's site fees are profit for them, basically.
Sure, and last year I think we made money many of the weeks that we were indoors, because we had the per person cost if we were under 20 players, but if we were over 20 players, it was still a cap of $100, and so we brought in, several weeks we brought in $30.
So, looking at it right now, granted, the section that shows cost is with an additional hour in both Ravenstone and Frozen Coast, and I suppose it wouldn't matter, but the attendance section, yeah, I guess that doesn't really make a difference. But what I'm looking at here is that the total cost, we're looking at $11,860, and the total income from the winner last year was only 10,150. So, going with what Shelby said, assuming that if income or attendance was exactly the same as last year, we would already be in the hole without doing any season passes.
Yeah, when I had initially put this together, I was figuring with the 2 hours for Frozen Coast and 2 hours for Ravenstone, and we were actually, if we had the exact same attendance numbers as last year, we were like $1,600 to the good, because our expenses were like 9,600 or something like that, and or maybe, oh yeah, it was like 9,600. So it was $400 to the good. Sorry. So there was a little bit of buffer already built in, but now with expanding to 3 hours for those two parks, that is not the case.
So it sounds like what would be, well, but we don't want to wait that long to decide, but it sounds like what would be a huge deciding factor is whether or not that budget amendment gets approved. Because right now, that sounds like the difference between a positive or a negative, but that's also like 4 weeks away, and we don't want to wait that long.
Well, we haven't had that discussion because my understanding would be that we would pay per person up to a cap, so that we'd never pay more than we would never be required to pay more than what the standard has been for the last few years. So I feel like I really need to talk to the management of our venue now, because if we do maintain the deal that we had last spring, then I don't. Yeah, at least the Frozen Coast portion of the budget will be balanced in that case.
I don't know. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was literally about to ask if anyone else had other thoughts, so by all means, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, we have two different issues going on here that have sort of coalesced at the same time. One, we have a potential amendment that we weren't necessarily discussing at the time that we were discussing season passes. So that is separate, but potentially impactful on our decision as far as how we handle season passes. And I'm not really sure the best way to like go about this, because if those budget amendments pass, it impacts the bottom line, and it does sort of impact what we can absorb in season passes, where people may basically be, getting $140 worth of play for free if we, depending upon how we managed it. And if we are operating at a deficit, then it makes it a little harder to stomach that, right?
Right. That's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm torn because I really would like to provide the season pass as a thing to our players. At the same time, like I said earlier, we're already 1,700 down, assuming that attendance is roughly the same as last year. And so part of me thinks that what might be better, since this is the first year where all the money comes from the same pot, what might be better is to use this year to see how these numbers look in a year from now and see if anything has changed, and maybe we would have to pass on season passes this year, and maybe it can be a thing next year.
Well, couldn't season passes exist in the way that they did before, which is just that the price of them varied based on the park, to instead of having a single Northreach wide one?
You're talking like you can purchase a season pass to a specific park?
Isn't that the way that it worked before, like prior to this discussion?
Yes, that is the way it worked before, because it used to be that each park had their own money pool. And I suppose that, yeah, we could do something like that. It does seem to go against the idea of consolidated banking and whatnot, but at the same time, that might be the only feasible way to make season passes a thing this year.
I mean, I don't think it'd be that hard. You just have a separate charge entry in Square for like FC season pass, season pass. It all goes to the same place still.
Yeah, no, definitely. I didn't mean to imply that it would be difficult to handle. I just was saying that it's kind of contradictive to everything coming from the same into and out of the same pot, even though it still would be. You're right. It's I shouldn't have mentioned it. I didn't mean that it was a big deal. It was just a thought, an observance that I had.
So let me ask a quick question. Does everyone have the same site fee amount? Are we all $5?
I don't know what Icefire Bay is doing these days. They were doing $1, but apparently their costs have increased, so I don't know what they're doing.
I feel like Hazel had said something about they had to go up to $2 or $3. It's still less than $5, whatever they're doing. But I think they're the only one that doesn't do $5. Well, in Astral Winds, I suppose, because you guys don't pay to go inside. So yeah, I think those are the only two that don't do $5.
It seems like we can still arrange a season pass. We just need to figure out what the price point would be. In other words, take a quick look at the spreadsheet. There's 30 entries for weeks minus one in February. That makes 29, which would be $145. So, I mean, whatever we figure out that price point needs to be, we could still do a season pass. It's just a matter of where we set it, you know. And I think in the past we've offered a small discount, I don't know, 10% or something like that, which would equate to roughly 3 weeks free. So I mean, could we consider doing something like that, where someone gets a season pass and they pay, what would that be, $130 or something? And as I'm thinking about it, one question that I'd like to know is how many people purchased a season pass in years past.
Last year in Lupin Moon, we had about a dozen people who purchased the season pass. One thing to keep in mind is that we've already had one of these weekends, so there is only $140 worth of sort of time out there left. So just something for us to keep in mind. But yeah, Lupin Moon has had good luck with the season pass. The other thing that I think it's important for us to sort of keep in mind is that the season pass is guaranteed money that is not dependent on attendance, and it's a understanding that it's non-refundable, right? If you stop coming, you've purchased the season pass. So, or if you go on vacation and you don't come every weekend, like you still have purchased the season pass. And the trade-off to that is that there's a discount and there's a convenience. You show up, you play, you don't worry about it. And for some people, that's super duper worth it. But that is guaranteed income at the beginning of the year, as we're going into paying a bunch of expenses out. So it has benefits beyond just the convenience of offering it to members.
I think that's a really good point, because I think even our best attenders often miss 1 or 2 weeks here and there. So it's not necessarily, with that in mind, it may not be a discount at all. It's just a convenience for them. But also, I think that's another thing to consider. Before we say no, we're not going to do a season pass this year. If there's 12 people in Lupin Moon, I think there was only 2 in Frozen Coast last year that did it. Naturally, or of course, we won't be able to ask Ravenstone, but if we're looking at 15 or less people overall, then I don't think that's going to be a major impact to the budget either way.
So if we did it not necessarily offering a discount, I think that would help. But my concern is offering a discount when we're already looking at essentially losing money.
I think this would actually it would help to offset that loss, because that loss is based on actual attendance, whereas the season pass is guaranteed income whether those people show up or not. Typically, the people who buy season passes are very regular attenders. And so it probably works out to be about the same either way. Um, but it's money you know you're going to have as income, regardless of what happens with attendance later on in the year. And if you look at, the attendance numbers on sheet one, you can kind of see where each of the parks runs into a bit of a lull, in like the December time zone, where they just have lower attendance than normal. Um, but people who've purchased season passes, their money's still counted towards that, whether they showed up or not. So I actually think it is a great way to potentially help to offset that deficit.
Okay. Yeah, I really agree. I think the season pass is a great idea for us.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
So
So,
then,
go ahead.
sorry, it's money stuff, and you know how passionate I am about money stuff. Then I think, the big question was, well, what if we had that, 4, 6, 10 people who decided they were going to, game the system by paying $125, $130 for a season pass, and then going to play Amp-Guard twice every weekend, essentially getting one day for free, paying $2.50 to pay instead of, or for site fees instead of $5. And so I'm thinking about, if we had the same distribution of season pass purchases as we've had in the past, one, Ice Fire Bay isn't going to buy any. It doesn't make any sense for them if they're only paying $3 anyways. Season pass doesn't make any sense for them. So then you're looking at Frozen Coast members, who might be playing in Frozen Coast and Ice Fire Bay. Well, if there was only 2 people who bought season passes previously, chances are pretty slim that those 2 people are gonna, go from Frozen Coast to Ice Fire Bay every weekend. And even if they do, Ice Fire Bay, if they're only charging $2, it's likely that we're still winding up ahead of the curve just due to them, having to take a weekend off or whatnot. So then you run into Lupamoon and Ravenstone. And that's probably the most sort of risky situation, because Lupamoon has been the highest consumer of season passes. So if we go on that average of 12 season passes, those are typically our high attenders, and we do have a lot of crossover between Lupamoon and Ravenstone, and it is usually our high attenders that travel to play with Ravenstone on Sunday as well. So I mean, there's the sort of the difficulty. That's probably the riskiest situation. It's kind of offset by the fact that Ravenstone has greatly decreased expenses, in that their space, even playing for 3 hours, is still less than half the cost of Lupamoon. So that factors in some way, shape, or form.
And where Ravenstone and Lupamoon both have set fees, the number of people that attend really doesn't impact the budget a whole lot. And I love the idea of the people that are super engaged in Amp-Guard not having to pay even more to play, because that can, I mean, $5 a week doesn't seem like a whole lot to some of us, but that can be cost prohibitive to some people, especially when you factor in gas money and travel from park to park and things. So I'm a big fan of the season pass. I would, I'll confess that it's my son and I that were the 2 that bought it in Frozen Coast, and I'd like to do it again this year. So I'm just going to throw the number out there. I think if it's Headland had a good point. 1 week is already gone. If we say that season passes maybe $125 because that's about $15 off. That seems like a decent deal, not a fantastic deal, but that's about 10% off. I think that's a pretty good price point.
That's pretty much exactly what I had in my mind, and I would lobby very strongly that you buy a Northreach season pass, and it'll get you everywhere you want to go.
Okay. Aurora, as the chief money lady for Northreach, how do you feel about that? The number 125 for a season pass.
I strongly support Headland's position.
See, now I'm confused if you're talking as the Supreme Chancellor or as her page.
Supreme Chancellor Page.
I'm teasing. I'm totally teasing.
I was gonna say, don't sully that girl. She is all professional.
No, I
And
know.
I should clarify really quickly. I do think that the Northreach season pass is a good idea. I raised some concerns just because I wanted to have the discussion, but I do think that it's a good idea. I like the idea of 125 for all across Northreach.
The politician shows in Niall.
It's like he does this for a living.
Or something.
Okay, I'd be okay with a season pass with all the points considered and whatnot. I'm pretty comfortable with a season pass of 125. So if everyone here is in agreement on that, then that's what we will do.
Lupin Moon will rejoice. They have been eagerly awaiting the information. It's something that our park has really embraced and has been really excited about. People look forward to just buying their pass and not having to worry about site fees for the rest of the winter. So, hip hip hooray!
Well, I am very glad we can bring happiness to your people.
I will create a season pass on the square, and I will remind my chancellors, and I will remind my chancellors that are currently here, that even cash transactions need to be recorded, and that way and don't forget to add the name of who purchased the season pass, or for whom this season pass has been purchased. That way we can have an active tracking system for who is on the list of season passes.
Can you also make a post on the Northreach Facebook announcing the season pass at 125?
I absolutely can. I will do that after I have it on the marketplace, however.
That's probably pretty smart.
So that's awesome. Do we now need to have discussion about budgets being scary looking, or no?
Well, we have the two budget amendments that I guess one has been, but the two that need to be presented, and we will go over them at the board meeting next Thursday. But unless somebody has something they want to talk about, I don't know that we need to have a budget discussion right now.
Well, I wanna point out this at the very least, that so it sounds like Frozen Coast is considering that and would like to, but it sounds like Ravenstone has signed papers, like a contract or something like that, with their site that may prove challenging to get, may or may not prove challenging to get out of.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. And I agree. But at the same time, I don't know that it's going to be a huge concern that the budget amendment will not be approved. And the budget they've been approved for will cover the cost of what they're doing, at least up until the November all thing. So I don't think it's going to be a huge problem. But you're right, it's definitely something to have on our radar that should the budget amendment not get approved, we could be in some trouble there.
Well,
So,
yeah.
yeah, I think it's also worth noting that if Ravenstone is starting out with 3 hours in the gym, I'm not sure what they did this last weekend, But if they're starting out with 3 hours in the gym, that really only gives them 3 weekends of, well, not even quite 3 weekends of play before their $220 budget is consumed. And that will not take them to the November All thing. So we'll have to address that in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. What can we do at this point? Like, how can we fix that?
Well, I guess part of it would be to see if perhaps we could postpone the 3 hour gym time until the budget is approved. Although, I think that Rage also said that they're billed on a monthly basis. So it could be that they'll only be billed for the October time, which would be within their $220 currently approved budget. And then by the time they get billed for their November time, the budget amendment would be approved. So, depending upon when they get billed, if it's at the beginning of the month or the end of the month, they could actually be fine. And now that I think about it, even if you get billed at the beginning of the month, if you just pay after the November All thing, you're still operating within the budget.
Yeah, and also she said I want to lean towards it's the end of the month because she said at our meeting that they just gave her keys and said, "Here, we'll bill you." And it seems to me that if they were going to bill at the beginning of the month, they would bill, even though it's halfway through the month, they would have billed them at the beginning of them going in for the month.
Yeah, and I think you're right. As I'm thinking back through working with Nefara on initially like paying them when they first moved inside, I think they do bill at the end of the month for the time that you've already used. In that case, they probably are unlikely to run into an issue of running up into their budget limit before it's able to be amended. Um, so they are unlikely then in that case to run into any issues with maxing out their budget before the amendment is able to go through.
Yeah, so I think we're good. I think it'll be okay as long as the budget amendment gets approved. I don't think we're going to have any problems.
Does anybody see any issues with the budget amendment being approved?
I doubt it. Typically, I'm not speaking for everyone. I'm just answering for me, but I do doubt it because typically, when you tell amp guarders, "Hey, we want to do more amp guard and we have the means to do it. Are you guys cool with that?" They tend to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally like I want everyone to do more amp guard, and like my thing was just initially we were talking about how it's going to cost us far more than we would be making, but I'm totally fine spending that money for people to do more amp guard. That's the whole point. I just want to make sure everyone else was too.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I think if you really of all the well, okay. So Loop and Moon would really be the only park where that would be a difficulty, just because of the sheer cost of our indoor space. Like we couldn't afford to add a third hour in our current location, because we don't have 60 people showing up every weekend to be able to support $200. That would be like $250 a weekend, right? But Ravenstone's cost is so incredibly inexpensive, that if their numbers remain as strong as they were, they can afford to do that, without really breaking a sweat. And the same with Frozen Coast. If their numbers this winter are as strong as they were at the end of, at the spring, uh, the numbers work. So that's great. And I'll say I might be a little bit jealous, but I really like our space, so it's totally cool.
Yeah, I really do think everything's going to be fine. I think they will get approved and there's not going to be anything to worry about.
I like it. Let's go.
All right. If there's nothing else, that will conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you, everyone.